London's Elizabeth line has been a success. Ridership has reached record highs, developments have surged along the line, and traveling across the city has never been easier. Yet, what many don't know is London built half of the line for free. Sort of. When the line was built, London wanted to replicate the success of Hong Kong's MTR, where developers step in to pay the bills for any new train line, only to find themselves unable to be the landlord that easily pulls in cash. The city not only had to deal with limited development spaces, but also a flawed tax scheme that sees the massive value generated by the new train line drain away with no way to grab on. While the Elizabeth line is no doubt a success, the story of how it found its paycheck is a lesson for every city that is pinching pennies for its next big transit project. Our story begins in the early 2000s. London's population has been increasing after decades of decline. Millions of new jobs were coming to the city. An increasing number of vehicles brought traffic in the central area to a halt, and the underground was seeing record-high ridership. Meanwhile, London has been rapidly expanding eastwards. The city needed a fast and efficient way to transport commuters between the historic city center, the newly developed financial center in Canary Wharf, and the outer suburban regions on each end. So the city decided to take another look at CrossRail, which was later known as the Elizabeth line. The project will include an east-west rail line under central London, and would use existing rail lines to connect with major suburban towns as well as Heathrow Airport. The project at the time was estimated to cost £15.9 billion, which was later reduced to £14.8 billion. In previous attempts, cost was a deal-breaker that kept the project from leaving the drawing board. This time, the central government only committed to funding one-third of the project's cost. To not let the price tag kill the project again, the city had to find innovative ways to secure the remaining funding, and it looked towards Hong Kong. Unlike most cities where the government pays the bills, Hong Kong's transit projects are financed through the Rail Plus property model. First, the Hong Kong government grants the land development rights around future transit stations to the MTR, the operator of the city's mass transit system, and get this, at its value before the rail development. Then, the MTR will partner with private developers to develop these lands. Finally, the increase in land value after the construction of the new rail line will be captured by the MTR, which could be used to pay off the construction and operating costs. The Hong Kong model inspired London and was desperate to bring it home. Yet, they realized that things weren't as easy as they expected. Unlike Hong Kong, where the government owns all the land and can grant any land they want to the MTR, land in the UK is privately owned, while the government could acquire land with a compulsory purchase order. The law requires that every parcel of that land to be used exclusively for public projects. In the case of the Elizabeth line, the government can take property that is necessary to construct the project itself, but can't take any nearby land just for the sole purpose of developing real estate. So rather than looking to the land around the station, the city had to look above it and utilize the space there for development. Real estate developments were planned and designed above several Elizabeth line stations. Eventually, these developments built above the stations were estimated to generate £500 million. But this was far from enough to fund the project. So in 2010, the city looked into other mechanisms to find the funding, specifically through a scheme called the Business Rate Supplement. Under a newly passed law, the city was able to charge businesses across Greater London an extra 2 pence for every £1 of their rateable value. To protect small businesses, only those with a rateable value over £55,000 were charged this extra tax, and this threshold was adjusted during revaluation years. In total, the BRS was projected to bring in £225 million annually. But there is a catch. Neither the overstation development nor the business tax generates the funding needed from day one. Developments can't be built above, let alone be sold, before the station underneath is complete. And unlike Hong Kong, where developers step in and cover the upfront cost of the entire rail project through a tender fee, the tax revenue from London businesses will take years to accumulate. The city had to use that guaranteed future tax revenue to secure a £3.5 billion loan. A total of £4.1 billion for immediate construction was secured through the BRS scheme, while the incoming tax revenue past the completion date will be paying off the debt in the decades to come. By taking advantage of the new developments expected across London as the Elizabeth line was being built, The city also planned to secure £600 million of funding through the legally required developer contributions and the mayor's community infrastructure levy, which charges developers a fee per square foot of new development built. The developer contributions were primarily generated through a deal with Canary Wharf Group and Berkeley Homes, in which they will pay for the cost of the Canary Wharf and Woolwich stations at their respective doorsteps in exchange for the development rights above the stations, combined with contributions from Transport for London, City of London and other sectors. The city was finally able to secure the £14.8 billion needed to construct the Elizabeth Line. The Elizabeth Line broke ground in 2009, and by 2022, trains were up and running with passengers, despite the multiple delays and a cost that later ballooned to nearly £19 billion. The Elizabeth Line was undoubtedly a success from day one. It not only reached a historic 500 million ridership number just 2.5 years into its operation, but has also been widely praised by the public as transformative for businesses and job opportunities along the line. On top of that, the construction of the Elizabeth Line spiked property values and encouraged new developments along the line. By 2018, the CrossRail business rate supplement schemes was generating around £250 million in revenue annually, exceeding the initial projection of £225 million. And the developer contributions and community infrastructure levy has reached the £600 million target a year early. All this might seem great, but what London captured was actually pennies compared to the value generated by the construction of the Elizabeth Line. The BRS scheme charges businesses based on a rateable value that is updated only every few years, whereas property prices can change overnight. This means that when those properties are spiking in prices, the BRS may only be able to charge taxes based on an outdated rateable value until the next revaluation. This leaves potential value increase that could be captured literally dripping out of the pipe. And with a flat tax rate of 2% being charged across Greater London, the BRS scheme tends to be unfair spatially, as businesses that sit next to the Elizabeth Line are being charged at the same rate as those sitting miles away, who are gaining fewer benefits from the line. Furthermore, the BRS charges are on the businesses that occupy a certain property, meaning the property owner is gaining wealth through the train line, while only the tenant is being taxed. On the other hand, while there was an enormous increase in residential housing prices, more than $13 billion by some estimates, the developer contribution and mayor's community infrastructure levy schemes were both found not to fully capture that wealth. The mayoral CIL was even found to only capture around 1% of the development value. This was a lost opportunity to ask developers who walk away with massive gains to pay their fair share. The BRS, developer contribution, and the mayoral CIL are also all limited to Greater London, leaving the wealth surge on the outer ends of the line out of reach. What made it worse is that the cost overruns of the Elizabeth Line forced the city to take 2 more loans, leaving it with £3.6 billion of debt as of this year. The incoming revenue from the BRS and CIL schemes isn't set to pay off these debts until the 2040s. London is not the only city facing challenges funding transit, and many cities worldwide have turned to land value capture as a secret funding tool. In the US, Chicago is funding its Red Line extension with a value capture tool called Tax Increment Financing, or TIF. Under this mechanism, the city sets a TIF district around a half-mile radius of the future transit extension. Then, the current property value is set as a baseline. When property value increases as the transit project progresses, the increase in tax revenue above the baseline is captured and used to fund the project. The Potomac Yard station on the DC Metro and the 7 train extension to Hudson Yards in New York City were all funded under a similar mechanism. In fact, Elizabeth Line isn't the first project in London to fund with value capture. The Northern Line extension to Battersea Power Station used tax increment financing along with developer contributions and mayoral CIL to pull off, and is intending to do so again with other DLR and overground extensions. Meanwhile, Paris has funded the Grand Paris Express, a massive regional metro expansion plan, primarily through an office space tax on businesses. But unlike London, Paris varies its rate spatially, so businesses in the city center are paying a larger share. This alone has brought in €544 million a year. Combined with other taxes, the city pulls in around €0.8 billion annually. Back in London, the city is looking at its next big project, CrossRail 2. Similar to the Elizabeth line, CrossRail 2 will be another crosstown railway, with high top speeds and large stop spacing, but this time running north-south. With a £31.2 billion price tag in 2017, planners in London are looking at a variety of ways to fund it. First off, the BRS and mayoral CIL schemes are expected to continue to fund CrossRail 2, but to capture a higher portion of the value increase, the mayoral CIL will be charged at a higher rate. Next, a council tax precept is proposed in both Greater London and across southeast Britain. Studies found CrossRail 2 to bring job and housing opportunities to communities outside the capital, and planners intend for those regional residents to pay a fair share of that benefit. In fact, only half of the funding is expected to come from London. Furthermore, TfL plans to use more efficient land value capture tools, such as tax increment financing and transit premium charges, to better utilize the wealth generated through the new train line. The one funding source I found most interesting is the potential privatization of trains, depots, and Elizabeth line tunnels as ways to reduce upfront costs and secure another chunk of funding. However, CrossRail 2 has faced multiple challenges. As mentioned earlier, the Elizabeth line cost overruns have left the BRS and CIL schemes paying off debt over the next decade and beyond. So revenues from these sources won't be able to go towards another mega project for quite a while. Furthermore, mechanisms like green belt development require investment in supporting infrastructure and will need to be purchased at the price after the rail, as CPO could not be used here, significantly reducing the value that could go towards funding the rail line. The pandemic only made things worse as bailouts for operations had to come first. The project was indefinitely shelved. But with the significant success of the Elizabeth line post-COVID and riders continuing to come back, the need for CrossRail 2 will only be more urgent. I believe it is about time to take a fresh look at all the tools on the table and sort out a viable funding stream. It is also worth mentioning that while MTR, the Hong Kong company that drew inspiration for London on capturing property value, operated the Elizabeth line until 2095, it wasn't directly involved in the overstation developments along the line. As I said earlier, the Elizabeth line is still a massive success, and the land value capture mechanisms have proved themselves as a viable way to reduce reliance on government funding to build a train line. However, it is undeniable that what was captured through these schemes wasn't the true value that the line generated, while making all land government-owned is far out of reach in the UK. Allowing land acquisition for broader development, setting flexible tax rates based on proximity to transit, charging tax rates based on real-time land prices, and asking developers to pay the upfront cost of the transit project should be mechanisms that are made legal. Also, borrowing the Hong Kong model doesn't mean you need ultra-high towers. Instead, should be finding a middle ground that can bring sufficient revenue while keeping local characters. At the end of the day, the goal shouldn't be for a city to blindly copy someone else's success story, while ignoring the local context and reality. Hi, this is Scott from Urban Man. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Since this was a video about London, I kept the explanation of the Hong Kong model brief. If you are interested and want to learn more about the Rail Plus property model, Hudson from Flying Moose has an awesome deep dive video on this topic. I strongly suggest you to check it out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next one.